Top of the morning to you. This is Irish Old Professor. Calling out to all Doctor Who fans who live in Queensland. If you're in Toowoomba or the Darling Downs, there's a Doctor Who event coming up at the USQ Refectory on Friday night, the 27th of November at 6 p.m. It's a free, family-friendly event. So get dressed up in all your Doctor Who gear to get extra points for the fan challenge. There's great prizes to be won at the end of the night. And there's Who food for purchase. Please say you're coming at the Unibar USQ event page at www.facebook.com/UnibarUSQ. And then register at functions@cateringpeople.com.au. This has been Irish Old Professor for Professor TV. Oops, late again.
Hello, I'm Scotty MacProfessor, the cousin of the Professor, although we don't look anything alike. Welcome to Visitor from Another World, and tonight our visitor is Susan Batho, who's teleported in just for tonight, and she will be leaving without us. We'll be left behind as usual. Thank you. Welcome, Sue. We're so happy to have you here. Sue, how old were you when you saw your first episode of Star Trek?
I was actually 13 years old. The series had started a year before in America, but as you know, it didn't start for a year here in Australia. And I watched it in between dances. I was at a dancing class, my dad was watching it, and I had to sneak out between dances, puffing and panting all the way down the hallway so I could see it. But that was my introduction to Star Trek.
What attracted you to Star Trek?
At the time, in those days, in the late 60s, we had fairly depressing kind of shows, very pessimistic views of the future. We had the Rod Serling series and we had Twilight Zone. We also had Doctor Who and Lost in Space, which my dad watched thoroughly. My mum, bless her heart, she always watched Deadly Earnest, and I got to sit up with her when Dad was on night shift, and we'd watch Deadly Earnest and all the B-rated Japanese science fiction shows. So I grew up on Godzilla and Mothra. But when we saw Star Trek for the first time, it was an idealistic vision of the future where we overcame our problems and we had this peaceful future for mankind, and that we would continue to grow and continue to develop as people and be much better, and this future was going to be good for our children.
At what point were you hooked on the show?
I was pretty much hooked from the first episode. I loved the idea of Uhura on board. I loved Spock to pieces, and of course we had our Scottish engineer who was absolutely adorable. So no, I really liked it all the way from episode 1.
What changed you from just watching the show to becoming an active fan?
I don't think I had much of a choice because the show was cancelled at the end of the second season. And at the time, I'd be one of these people who had to get every single article about Star Trek, possibly. And there was an article about Shane McCormack, who was 2 years older than me, so she was 15 at the time. And she was organising a participation in something called Deluge Monday, which was a writing exercise where we all wrote why the show should not be cancelled, and they were all timed to flood the network on the same day. And so I wrote to Shane, and Shane was already a member of fandom in that she was a science fiction fan and already attending conventions and that, so she kind of took me under her wing and introduced me to fandom and active fandom.
How and when did you meet fellow fans?
Well, I actually met them through Shane McCormack, who heard from a whole lot of others at the time, same as myself, who had written to her and say, how can I help? And she got the idea that maybe it was good to form a Star Trek group, and we called ourselves Down Under Space Kooks, or Dusk. And we had our own little magazine, and that was the first kind of thing I did with Shane, and we met at her place, just a few of us at a time, until I think my first convention was in 1972, when I went with her and I met a whole lot of Star Trek fans that I became friends with.
What makes Star Trek fans different from other genre fans?
I'd say that Star Trek fans tend to diversify their interests, but still say first and foremost they're Star Trek fans, because first and foremost they're optimists. And although they'll watch other shows and even put out fanzines or write about them, when it comes down to the crunch, if you ask them, are you a Trekkie or a Trekker or a Trek fan, they'll say, yes, I am. And they won't, shun away from that question. They are very positive people, usually.
So, as fans, what did you really get up to?
Oh dear. How many things can I say without getting into trouble? We've gotten up to a lot of stuff. We enjoy dressing up. We enjoy each other's company and doing madcap things. We enjoy putting on conventions and writing for our fanzines and corresponding with people. So we got up to all those sorts of things. Mind you, we've also got up to other things as well. For instance, one fan who was dressed as an Andorian was told by a bartender who was bent over laughing at the time, "That's all right, I'll serve you now, you can stop holding your breath," because he was so blue. But yes, we attended premieres of movies dressed in our costumes, and we don't feel ashamed of it. We feel that we're just having fun, and we're having fun with life.
As a writer, what publications did you put out?
Oh, what didn't I produce? First publication I ever put out was not a Star Trek zine, contrary to popular belief. I actually put out a straight science fiction magazine, and it was called Girls' Own Fanzine, and it was due to the influence of my then husband, who was a straight science fiction fan. Then Jenny Stevenson, who became Jenny Kentwell, put out an all fiction and poetry fanzine called Beyond Antares. And she only ever had the energy to do one, but I took it up enthusiastically and made at least 40 issues of the magazine. So Beyond Antares was my straight Star Trek magazine. Beyond Antares R-rated was the one in brown paper covers that I won't tell you the contents thereof. I've put out Blake 7 magazine called Chronicles, and an R-rated Blake 7 magazine called Blake 7 The Other Side, or TOS. I've also put out a Simon and Simon magazine for those who like detective fiction, and Eye of Newt for those who like pure fantasy, and a couple of others as well, including a critical review magazine called Reviewzine. Very imaginative.
So, what type of fan events do you enjoy the most?
I like fan events that are actually directed and run by fans, not corporations, and especially ones that are small and intimate. Recently we had, in February, we had a Medtrek reunion, which was a great deal of fun. It was only just over a day long, but by golly, it was bringing back all the good things that we enjoyed about fandom. Apart from that, I love going to Worldcon, the World Science Fiction Convention. Once I got over the horror of how many people go to these things, and last year we went to London along with over 10,000 other people. They have things that I love to do. I love to attend plays and radio plays. I love attending fan performances and seeing the costumes in the halls as well as the masquerade. I just like to do. So I love events where I can do and not just be an audience member.
Is there a current Star Trek club?
As far as I'm aware, there's only the official one, and it doesn't do anything as far as I know, because certainly nothing comes out to fans very much at all. The Austrek club, which was the last club I think to fold, had a very, very sad entry in their webpage that said, due to lack of interest, we are folding, which just broke my heart when I saw it. At the time I was writing my thesis about Star Trek fans and their activities, and to see the clubs basically fold was heartbreaking.
There have been many Star Trek stories that have been very scary. Which are your favorite scary stories?
I think one of my favourite ones would be the Salt Vampire one, which was considered very scary for its time slot as a children's science fiction show, and it was banned in a lot of states in America. I just found it scary too. And the other one that I found was scary in that it was so much like reality and truth was Harlan Ellison's City on the Edge of Forever. That's the episode where he said that the most important 3 words in the universe is not "I love you," but "let me help." And I think that resonated for every fan.
What do you really like about being a fan?
Well, when you're in a fan club, you know everyone likes the same thing as you do. That's a great thing. And there's a lot of support. I'd be in hospital for something and I'd have fans roll up with toys into the hospital to cheer me up and it'd be absolutely wonderful on their way home from a convention because I couldn't get there. And then they'd bring an autographed something, and they'd bring all sorts of wonderful toys for me, and I'd be able to use them in the hospital, of course. But yeah, it's the like-minded friends that you make, and a lot of those friends I still have now. And we've been friends now since Aztrex began in 1976. So we've had friends now for 40 years.
Are there any Star Trek events planned for the near future?
Oh, you betcha. 50 years of Star Trek coming up next year. And in Australia, we're having a big party in July, just to be the same, on the same date. So we're having it in July at Parramatta, big party for a whole weekend, fan run with fan events, costumes, skits, parodies, you name it, we're going to have it. It's going to be fun.
How does someone join in with all this fun?
Well, the way we used to do it is you find a mentor, someone else who's already there. And that could be through finding someone who's done something and you write to them, or in bookshops especially, where there's signs up that says, like-minded people meeting on Thursday nights at Galaxy, things like that. It is easy to find friends that are like-minded. With Star Trek these days, most of the groups are online, so just type in Star Trek and you'll see lots coming up, especially if you say Star Trek communities or Star Trek clubs. And you'll find a whole lot of online things that you can participate in. If you prefer to meet in person, bookshops often have groups that they have tea and coffee and chats with, and also keep an eye out for notices about conventions, because science fiction conventions are a great place to meet people.
How has Star Trek impacted on your personal life?
I don't think that Star Trek has not affected any part of my life. There's two phrases they use in fandom. One is, fandom is just a goddamn hobby, or fandom is a way of life. In my life, it's been my way of life. Star Trek had the ideals of IDIC, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations, which means everybody's accepted for what they are. And that's part of my soul now, that I believe all of us have worth, every single person. And so that's deeply held belief in my life, and it's affected me with my talent. I've done my writing through my writings in Star Trek. I've completed MA Hons in creative writing, where I was introduced to people as a writer of homoerotic fiction because of my R-rated Star Trek stories. My ability to run conventions has been used by various jobs that I've had, where I've had to organise conferences for them. And as well as that, I have a really strong love of teaching. And I've been blessed to be able to teach Star Trek studies at one stage, but I have now got an MA Hons as well in audience media studies, and have written a PhD thesis on the effect of copyright on fans. So it's really strongly affected my whole life, and I find it as part of my life. And I'll just share a funny story with you. I even met my husband through it because he turned up to a convention, and at that convention we met at the registration table and became firm friends, and are still firm friends 20 odd years later.
Thank you very much, Sue, for being here today, and I hope you have a good trip back to wherever it is you've come from.
Thank you very much for your very kind welcome there. I'm so glad we beamed in.
Live long and prosper.
Has anyone seen Carl? Tonight we have Boris Karloff in The Ape. But first, at Horror Host Tome. Welcome everybody, the Professor here again, with another horror host, and again from Australia. Ah yes, Ralph Baker Deadly Earnest from Victoria.
Oh, what a week! Lashings and lashings of pain! Oh, just it, lashings and lashings! Oh, well, bye-bye, and we'll see you next week. No, it's the beginning. Oh, well. Hello, viewers. This is awful news. Long may you suffer. And tonight's movie is called The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini. What? The Ghost in the Invisible... An invisible bikini. So that means you can't see it. And that means you can see what... Claude, what? Worth feeding to Igor. Perhaps we could watch a commercial or two. They're not worth watching either. Claude, Why do we put ourselves through this torture every week? Why? Why? Because we like it, that's why.
The third known Australian horror host was Ralph Baker. He was one of 5 different actors to play Deadly Earnest in Australia. The Deadly Earnest character was originated in Western Australia's TVW7. Baker's show aired from the 27th of October 1967 until the 10th of April 1970, showing 126 episodes in all. Baker began his television career working on the Ian Melbourne Tonight Show. In 1967, he started on Deadly Earnest's Awful Movies as the host Deadly Earnest. Baker presented a variety of horror movies, feeling free to pan many of the movies as being really bad. His Deadly character was true gothic in style. Deadly also had assistants: Claw, which was Baker's left hand; Hoof, which is Baker's foot; Eagle, a devouring sound effect; and Lily, the skeleton. Baker also worked on other shows before, during and after the Deadly Earnest show concluded. These shows included the Magic Circle Club, The Ghost Show, Commotion, and Hey Dad. In 1969, he also produced Good Morning Mr. Doubleday, in which the Deadly Earnest character was used in an episode, A Sidecar Named Desire. Over the years, Baker has made guest appearances at various events. These included Ballarat races during the Begonia Festival, the 60s Appreciation Society, and in May 2011 at the Horrorpalooza at the Astor Theatre, where he thrilled many fans. He left the industry in 1974 and has since worked as a puppeteer, forming his own company, the Pinnacle Puppet Theatre, and now, with thanks to Garfield Barnard, a clip from the 2011 Shockley Horror Picture Show where Nigel Honeybone interviews Ralph Baker.
Welcome back to the Schlocky Horror Picture Show. I hope you're enjoying the Double D Avenger as much as we are in the studio. I'll talk about our feature presentation soon, but first I have waiting on the line Mr. Ralph Baker, who played horror host Deadly Earnest in Melbourne from 1967 to 1972. Mr. Baker, are you there? Hello?
Yes.
Thank you for joining me here tonight on the Schlocky Horror Picture Show. Now, the first obvious question is, how exactly did the character of Deadly Earnest come about?
Deadly Earnest came about because the O10 network had bought a package of films. They were all B-grade horror films, and they didn't know what to do with them. And I believe it was Ian Bannerman in Sydney who came up with the idea of having a horror host and then presenting these as horror movies. So he was actually the first Deadly Earnest in Sydney. And all the other channels throughout the O10 network decided to follow suit. So there was almost one in every state. Brisbane had one. We started one in Melbourne. There was one in Adelaide. And I think the Adelaide one also covered Perth.
If I may interrupt there, sir.
They asked me if I'd like to do it, showed me footage of Ian Bannerman's work in Sydney, and then we set about writing and producing our own version. We went to wardrobe and messed about with the clothes and coming up with the costume that I wore, which was the top hat, like a sort of an 18th century funeral director's hat with a ribbon tied round it, and a frock coat.
Yes, yeah, if I could just...
A big exaggerated bow tie and so on.
I'm sorry,
But
hang
the
on.
fact that each state did their own version meant that they were all quite different. They all looked different, and they all went about it in a different way. So that's about how it happened.
I believe you made a lot of public appearances too. I don't go out much myself. I'm quite the homebody, you might say. A slight dog problem.
Yes, I did quite a lot of personal appearances, which at first took us quite by surprise because we had no idea that the character was going to be so popular. And when people started contacting the station and saying, oh, look, we've got something on, we'd like to have Deadly Earnest make an appearance, we had to start following them up and doing these personal appearances. I would generally get made up and dressed at the studio, and then from there we would drive to wherever the venue was. Well, across Melbourne, it might be an hour away before you got there, and here we were driving through suburban streets, city streets, with me in full makeup and full kit, and I got some very funny looks at stoplights at times. People just, as they do at stoplights, just sort of looking around, they'd suddenly see you and, oh, that's Deadly! And we got all sorts of funny reactions. One of the funniest ones that I did, fortunately, wasn't very far from the channel, and it was a football match, believe it or not, between the cast of Hair and the Channel 10 boys, or Channel O boys as it was then. And I was going to make an appearance at the match. They got hold of an old 1924 hearse and put my coffin in the back of the hearse, and he said, right, well, you can hop in the car, and just before we get there, we'll open the back and you can get in the coffin. Well, we found that didn't work, because as soon as you put the coffin inside the hearse, there wasn't enough room to open the lid. So the only thing I could do was hop in the coffin. Then they put the coffin in the hearse, and I actually drove to the football match in the coffin. Not many of you can say that you've driven around in your own coffin, I'm sure. But we arrived there, they unloaded the coffin out of the hearse, and I popped out of the coffin. So it was something quite different.
Oh, welcome to my world. Lucky you're not claustrophobic.
Normally I am, but it didn't seem to bother me. I could hold the lid up a bit so I could breathe and so on. It didn't worry me, or perhaps I've just become more paranoid in my older years or something.
One of the problems with working for community television is that I have to do my own makeup. Did you ever have that problem?
In appearances in later years, and I have done some since he finished on television, my daughter has done a makeup course, and she's able to do it. My wife has been able to do it, so we've managed to get by. But generally, as I say, we went to the studio and did all makeup and getting dressed there, and then just shocked the motorists on the road as we went.
Did Deadly Earnest ever get fan mail saying what a complete bastard he was? I get those sorts of letters all the time, which is better than nothing, I suppose.
Well, people would write and say that, and we took it as a compliment, of course. It's what I was supposed to be. So it was very hard to know in that case if they were really meaning to be nasty, or if in their nastiness they were being complimentary. We just took it that they were complimentary, and that was that. And because of the number of fan letters, which again was something that took us by surprise, I didn't really have to write very much of a script each week, because the fan letters gave it to me. They'd write poems and all sorts of things that I was able to read and to use on air. So they actually made my job easier, which was good.
I wish I had a writer. Anyway, I happen to know that Deadly Earnest is not the only character you've played on television. What other skeletons have you got in your closet?
I did do a bit in the Magic Circle Club once as another character, just a small character in part of their show. And I also stood in once for Fifi Bear in the Magic Circle Club. Fifi Bear, who was played by John Michaelhausen, and of course was in a bear costume, and you couldn't tell who was in the costume anyway. So I did actually stand in for him once because he had to dash off somewhere. I made a few very minor appearances in my earlier days in television on In Melbourne Tonight, during comedy sketches with Graham Kennedy. The only other thing that I remember making an appearance again was on In Melbourne Tonight. Was my 21st birthday. I actually was in Melbourne Tonight, and they sang happy birthday to me on the show. So that was something memorable too.
Getting back to Deadly Earnest, how was the name chosen?
Well, we didn't have to choose the name. It came to us already saying that we want to do this character called Deadly Earnest. And we looked at the spelling of it, where Ernest was spelt E-A-R-N-E-S-T. And it was a nice play on words that we could use, and it became Deadly's signature line that he'd say, "When I say that this movie is awful, I'm deadly earnest." And that became his signature line each week, really, introducing the movies.
Were there any Jekyll and Hyde problems separating the character from your own real life? For instance, whenever I visit the doctor's office, I have to resist the urge to stand still in the corner.
I'd walk into the makeup room as Ralph Baker, sit down in the makeup chair, and an hour later I'd emerge as Deadly Earnest. And there really was a change that took place. As Deadly, I did things that I would never do as myself. One perfect example was hosting a horror movie night at a local movie theatre. And I was sitting on the stage talking with the audience, and somebody placed a Hessian bag on the stage beside me and said, "That's for you, Deadly." I didn't know what was in the bag, but I took one look at the bag and I guessed that there was a snake in there. And sure enough, there was. But as Deadly, I just opened the bag, stuck my hand in there and pulled the snake out. Now, I would never do that. Snakes are not my thing. But as Deadly, I just did it without a second thought. I was handed a dead rat another time at a university function that I attended. All sorts of things that I just took in my stride as Deadly. It would absolutely horrify me as Ralph Baker.
As regular viewers already know, we do our show live and direct every Friday night. Was your show pre-recorded at all, or did it go straight to air?
No, it didn't go straight to air. We used to tape a fortnight at a time. So we'd tape on I think it was a Friday afternoon, and we'd do that Fridays and the next Fridays, so that one would go to air that night, the other one the following week, and then we would tape again. So, but everything that was taped went to air. Sometimes, with as far as the management were concerned, disastrous results. There was one occasion when Deadly had, I think it was a copy of TV Times, and he was looking through the TV Times to see what was on at the same time slot, and said, "Oh, there's really nothing worth watching. It's, on Channel 2, there's the tennis. The tennis is on Channel 2. I don't know why you're watching me. You should be watching the tennis." And evidently the next day, the general manager had a phone call from a friend of his who said, "Very grateful to that host of yours. I'd forgotten all about the tennis, and he reminded me." The general manager wasn't actually very impressed. "You don't spend your time recommending people watch the other channel." And as a joke, fortunately, when I went to collect my pay that week, there wasn't any. He told the paymaster, "Take Ralph's envelope out and we'll tell him he's not getting paid." They did come good, fortunately, but that was his little joke to get back at me.
For the last 3 decades, I understand you've still been treading the boards, so to speak, with your very own puppet theatre. Puppets are a little old-fashioned. Care to explain yourself?
My theatre's called the Pinnacle Puppet Theatre, and that began originally by a friend asking me to do a show for an event she was organising. So I made the whole show and put it all together, and have just carried it on ever since. My wife and I have recently finished a 5-month journey with a caravan on the back of the car, touring around basically the western half of Australia. And thoroughly enjoyed it, and we want to take 12 months and go around Australia with a caravan and take the puppet show with us and do puppet shows on the way. I think it'd be a great experience.
Now that's my idea of entertainment. Little things hitting each other. Well, my producer's either giving me the wind-up signal or he's demonstrating how to pleasure a very large lady. Do you have any final comments concerning your time with Deadly Earnest before we wrap up this interview?
Deadly was a fun character to play because he could play things in reverse to the normal. So if Deadly said something was horrible, you knew that it was really quite good. You always could take the opposite with him. And he also had the ability, because of the sort of character he was, of being able to tell the truth, which many other television presenters of that day were quite jealous of, because Deadly could say, look, I don't know why you want to watch this movie. It's absolutely dreadful, which was absolutely true. Other hosts couldn't do that. They had to build up their programs and say, oh, this is a wonderful program. I'm sure you'll enjoy it thoroughly. And they'd say to me, oh, I wish I could tell the truth the way you do. So that was a side of Deadly that was fun. I had great fun doing it over the years. I guess the thing where we missed out a little bit in those days, these days would be different. We didn't have the merchandising to follow up on it. Oh, who knows? I could have made a lot of money.
Yes, fine. Shut up. I'm deeply sorry to interrupt you there, Mr. Baker, but my producer is definitely giving me the wind-up, and if I try to ignore him, he hits me with a ruler. I'm sure you understand. You've worked in television.
And now a little bit of information on the ape.
We got to catch him prowling after dark.
Think he's still hanging around the village?
He got Mason, didn't he? And we found new tracks up around Dr. Adrian's house.
Maybe we men of science think different from other people, but if they ever find out in the village what you've been doing...
You mean about the animals?
Yes, some of the dogs have been missed.
Well, that phase of the experiment is all over. That ape seems to take a fancy to your place. Now, don't take offense, Doctor. I'm just trying to clear up my mind. Them dogs of mine have been sniffing ape for days. It's made them foolish, I guess. Else why'd they snarl at you?
Hey, Doc, what are you going to do to me?
I'm going to write you into medical history.
The 1940 Monogram Pictures movie, The Ape, was written by Kurt Siodmak and Boris Karloff. Karloff also starred in the leading role. Karloff was born William Henry Pratt on 23 November 1887 in Camberwell, England. He has been acting in movies since 1919, starring in 206 movies and television shows. Some of his more famous characters include Frankenstein's monster and The Mummy. He died in 1969 in England. The story centres around Dr. Bernard Adrian. The doctor seeks a cure for a young woman who has poliomyelitis. He has discovered that spinal fluid from a human is required to complete the formula for his serum. At the same time, a circus ape has escaped its cage and is terrorizing the local community. The ape breaks into Dr. Adrian's laboratory, with the doctor killing it. During the struggle, the ape has destroyed the doctor's supply of spinal fluid. Desperate, the doctor skins the ape and disguises himself as the ape. He then sets out to kill the locals and steal their spinal fluid. I think he would have more chance skinning a banana. You be the judge.
And now for some monkey business. The ape.
We got a gorilla for sale. Magilla gorilla for sale.
You can start now, Chuck.
Buy 'em, take 'em home and try 'em. Gorilla for sale. Don't you want a little gorilla you can call your own? A gorilla moving with you when you're all alone.